Mothers, have you ever blamed yourselves for your daughter's choice in men? The doctor asked my son-in-law to choose between killing his kids or his wife. I was in the kitchen when Matt called me while my daughter was in labor. They said Julia's bleeding and the baby's stuck wrong and they can't save both and I have to pick who dies. His voice cracked. This was the same man who'd grabbed my hands at their wedding reception, looked me dead in the eyes, and sworn he'd protect my Julia with his life. I was already grabbing my keys, my coffee mug shattering on the kitchen floor. Tell them to save Julia. Matt, listen to me. Save Julia. I can't breathe. This is too much. I could hear the doctor in the background, her voice urgent. Sir, we need a decision in the next 60 seconds or we'll lose them both. My speedometer hit 90 as I wove between cars. Through the phone, I heard Matt hyperventilating. I need air. I need to sit down. Matt! I screamed so loud the driver next to me stared. My daughter is dying. I'm having chest pains. Oh gosh, I think I'm having a heart attack. The doctor's voice again, more frantic. Sir, we need an answer now. Then I heard my daughter, my baby girl, screaming in the background. Not the controlled sounds of labor. Pure agony. I abandoned my car sideways across the emergency room entrance and ran. The automatic doors seemed to open in slow motion. I could still hear everything through the phone. Julia had stopped screaming. My daughter is dying! I shoved past security, following signs to labor and delivery. The doors were locked. Some kind of security system. I pounded until my fists went numb, leaving bloody prints on the white paint. A nurse finally opened a side door and I lied straight to her face. I'm Dr. Lang. I was called for a consultation. She hesitated just long enough for me to push past. I followed the sounds of commotion. My daughter's room had its door wide open. What I saw stopped me cold. Matt was sitting on the floor against the wall, breathing into a paper bag, rocking back and forth. And on the bed, my Julia was surrounded by blood everywhere, her face gray, monitors screaming. Save her! I lunged toward the doctors. I'm her mother! I'm deciding, save my daughter! The lead doctor didn't even look at me. Only the husband can make this decision. He's not even conscious. Look at him! I tried to physically push them toward Julia, but security appeared from nowhere, grabbing my arms. Do something! I broke free for just a second, long enough to reach Julia's hand. It was already cold. I'm here, baby. Mommy's fighting for you. They dragged me out as I watched the monitors flatline. Through the window, I saw them stop CPR while Matt still sat on the floor with his paper bag. I called 911 from the hallway, my voice raw. They're letting my daughter die because her husband won't decide. Ma'am, that's not a police matter. The husband has medical authority. 45 minutes. That's how long they made me wait outside before a nurse with dead eyes came to get me. You can come in now. Julia's body was covered with a white sheet, just her face showing, arranged to look peaceful, like she was sleeping. But my baby girl never slept with her mouth slightly open like that. And there was Matt, standing, holding the baby, taking a goddamn selfie. Look, she has my nose, he said to his phone camera, adjusting the angle for better lighting. The nurse who'd walked me in, different from the others, younger, whispered as she passed. Both could have lived. If he'd decided immediately, we had a chance to save both. But after 5 minutes, she shook her head and walked away. Another nurse was handing Matt pamphlets about grief counseling while he posted on Instagram. I saw her lean over to her colleague. Did you see? We gave him Xanax for his panic attack while she bled out. I've never seen anything like it. You killed her. The words came out calmer than I felt. Your panic attack killed my daughter. Matt's head snapped up, his face transforming into something I'd never seen before. How dare you? I was traumatized. I almost had a heart attack. Julia had a heart attack. She died while you breathed into a bag. I'm the victim here. His voice rose to a pitch I'd never heard from him. I lost my wife. I have to raise this baby alone. I moved toward the baby, my granddaughter, Julia's baby, and Matt stepped back like I was contagious. You're unstable. Security. She's attacking me again. The next hour was a blur. Matt told the police I'd caused his panic attack by screaming at him during a medical emergency. He used words like harassment and re-traumatization, and I found myself in handcuffs in the police station. That's when I decided that when I was done with him, they would use words like rest in peace. I sit in my kitchen at 3 a.m. with shaking hands, writing down every single detail I remember from that phone call and the hospital while it's still fresh in my mind. The police let me go after 2 hours with a citation for disorderly conduct and trespassing, but I drove straight home and grabbed the first notebook I could find. The citation sits on the table next to my coffee, charging me with crimes that sound ridiculous compared to what happened to Julia. But all I can think about is her cold hand and Matt taking that selfie. I write down timestamps starting from when Matt first called me, the exact words the doctor said through the phone about needing a decision in 60 seconds, how long Matt sat on that floor breathing into his paper bag while I counted the seconds through the window. I write down the names of every nurse I saw, what the security guards looked like, the color of the blood on the sheets, the way Julia's mouth hung open slightly when they covered her face. My handwriting gets messier as I go, but I don't stop. filling page after page with everything because I know memory fades and I need this documented while it's raw and clear. When the sun comes up, I try calling the hospital to ask about seeing Julia's body one more time, but the woman in the morgue tells me only the spouse can authorize access since they were legally married. The words spousal next of kin authority make me want to scream into the phone, but instead I thank her calmly and hang up, adding this conversation to my timeline with the exact time and her name written in capital letters. My daughter is dead and I need permission from the man who let her die just to say goodbye properly. I force myself to eat something, just toast that tastes like cardboard, and then open my laptop to check if Matt has posted anything new about Julia's death. His Instagram shows 3 new posts from this morning with pictures of the baby, captions about being a single dad now and staying strong for my little girl, and hundreds of comments calling him brave and amazing. He's already rewritten the story, so he's the hero, and reading his version where he tried everything to save them both makes my hands shake so hard I have to close the laptop before I throw it across the room. I call the 911 records department and ask how to request the audio recording of my call from the hospital hallway yesterday. The clerk tells me I need to file a formal public records request in writing, which can take 30 days, but she confirms the recording exists and includes my statements about Matt's condition. I start writing the request immediately, my fingers flying across the keyboard, knowing that recording proves I told them my daughter was dying while her husband had a panic attack. My phone rings, and it's a number I don't recognize, but when I answer, it's a man from the hospital security telling me there's been a complaint filed about my unauthorized entry to labor and delivery yesterday. He says this is an informal warning, but any future trespassing will result in arrest and a formal ban from the hospital property. I apologize and promise it won't happen again, even though what I really want to say is that they should be apologizing to me for letting my daughter bleed to death while they gave her husband drugs for his anxiety. Matt sends me a text message that's clearly been written by a lawyer or someone coaching him, saying he needs space to grieve and process his trauma, and that my aggressive behavior at the hospital has made him fear for his safety. He says he's blocking my number, and if I try to contact him again, he'll seek a restraining order, and that I won't be receiving any updates about the baby until he feels safe. The message ends with, "I hope you can respect my boundaries during this difficult time," and then suddenly I can't text him back because I'm blocked. I spend the rest of the day looking up lawyers who handle medical malpractice and wrongful death cases, making a list of questions to ask during free consultations. Most of the websites say initial consultations are free, so I start calling and leaving messages, explaining briefly that my daughter died during childbirth due to delayed medical decision-making. 3 firms call me back that same afternoon, and I schedule appointments for next week, feeling like I'm finally doing something useful, instead of just sitting here drowning in rage. The hospital's patient relations department sends me a letter in the mail with their condolences and a generic complaint form I can fill out if I have concerns about the care Julia received. The form has tiny boxes for brief descriptions and asks me to rate my satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 5. Like this is a restaurant review instead of my daughter's death. I fill it out anyway in careful block letters, attaching 3 additional pages of timeline and requesting a formal review of what happened in that delivery room. Julia's funeral is in 4 days, and Matt is handling all the arrangements through the funeral home without asking for my input or even telling me the details. I call the funeral director directly and explain I'm the mother of the deceased, and after some back and forth, he agrees to let me do a reading during the service as long as Matt approves it. I pick a poem Julia loved in high school and email it to the funeral director, swallowing my pride because I need to be at my daughter's funeral even if it means playing nice with Matt. The funeral happens on a gray Saturday morning, and Matt shows up with the baby in a designer carrier, wearing an expensive black suit and greeting people like he's hosting a networking event. I watch him take photos with Julia's college friends and post them to his Instagram story with sad face emojis, and I count at least 15 people who come up to tell him how strong he is, while I sit alone in the front row. During my reading, I keep my voice steady and don't look at him, focusing on Julia's casket and remembering her as a little girl, not as the cold body I touched in that hospital room. After the funeral, I spend 3 days sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop and a stack of medical journals I ordered online. I start with basic articles about informed consent and work my way into the complex legal stuff about emergency situations. The first article I read explains that doctors can use something called implied consent when a patient can't make decisions, and waiting would cause death or serious harm. I highlight this section in yellow and add it to my notes with the page number. The next journal talks about a court case where a hospital was found at fault for waiting too long for family consent during a heart attack emergency. I read this one twice and printed out. By the end of day 1, I have 17 articles printed and organized in a binder with tabs for different topics. Day 2, I focus specifically on obstetric emergencies, and I find a legal review that says most states allow doctors to proceed with life-saving treatment when delay would result in maternal death, even without explicit consent from the husband. I read this paragraph over and over until I have it memorized. The more I read, the clearer it becomes that the hospital staff had legal grounds to save Julia without waiting for Matt's decision. They chose to follow their protocol and wait for spousal consent instead of acting on the emergency exception that would have let them just save her. On day 3, I make a timeline showing the 5-minute delay and matching it against the legal standards I found, and the evidence is right there in black and white that they could have saved her but didn't. I call the first attorney on my list and schedule a consultation for the following week. The next morning, I drive 40 minutes to a law office in a building downtown with dark wood paneling and leather chairs in the waiting room. Liliana Porter comes out to meet me, and she's in her 50s with gray hair pulled back and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. We sit in her office, and she pulls out a yellow legal pad while I tell her everything from the phone call to the hospital to Matt taking that selfie. She doesn't interrupt once, just keeps writing notes in careful handwriting, and when I finish, she sets down her pen and looks at me with kind eyes. She explains that wrongful death claims in my state can only be filed by the surviving spouse, or if there's no spouse, then by the children or parents. Since Matt is alive and is the legal spouse, he's the only one with standing to sue the hospital. She says this gently, like she knows it's going to hurt, and she's right because I feel like someone just punched me in the stomach. I hadn't realized that even seeking justice through the courts requires Matt's cooperation, and he's shown zero interest in holding anyone accountable. Liliana sees my face and quickly adds that there are other things I can pursue that don't need Matt's involvement. She explains I can file a complaint with the state medical board about the attending doctor's decisions. I can file problems with the hospital's patient relations department and their risk management department. I can potentially pursue grandparents' visitation rights through family court. She writes all this down on a separate sheet and slides it across the desk to me. None of these will bring Julia back or punish Matt the way I want, but they're actual steps I can take. I leave her office with the list of actions and a small retainer agreement for limited legal advice that costs me $300. That night, I sit at my kitchen table again and make a detailed action plan with deadlines for each step. I organize my timeline and all my evidence into clearly labeled folders. One for medical records, one for witness statements, one for legal research, one for communications with Matt and the hospital. For the first time since Julia died, I feel like I have some control over what happens next, even if it's not the quick revenge I initially wanted. The next day, I meet with Liliana again and have her draft a formal spoliation letter to send to the hospital's legal department. The letter demands they preserve all medical records, medication administration logs, security footage, and staff communications related to Julia's delivery. Liliana explains that using phrases like anticipated litigation and destruction of evidence puts them on notice that they could face serious problems if any records mysteriously disappear. I pay her $500 for this service and sign the letter, and she promises to send it certified mail that same afternoon. I spend an entire day at home drafting my formal patient relations complaint. I go through my timeline minute by minute and support it with the 911 call request confirmation I got back, witness statements I collected from my sister who was on the phone with me during the drive, and a detailed account of everything I saw at the hospital. The complaint ends up being 8 pages long, and I attach copies of all my documentation. I request a root cause analysis of why the medical team waited for Matt's decision, instead of proceeding under emergency implied consent protocols. I print it out and read it 3 times to make sure every detail is accurate. Then I drive to the post office and mail it certified with return receipt requested, so I have proof they received it. 2 weeks pass, and I check my mailbox every single day for any response. Finally, a woman named Sienna Henderson from the hospital's risk management department calls me. Her voice is smooth and practiced like she does this all the time. She says the hospital takes all patient concerns seriously, and they're conducting an internal review of the events surrounding Julia's delivery. Everything she says is carefully worded to avoid any admission of fault. When I ask her directly why they gave Matt drugs for his anxiety while Julia bled to death, she pauses for just a second, and then says she can't discuss specific medical decisions during an ongoing review. I thank her politely even though I want to scream at her, and after we hang up, I document the call in my notebook with the exact time and date and all her evasive responses. The next week, I meet with Liliana again to discuss grandparents' visitation rights, and the news is not good. She explains that in my state, grandparents can only petition for court-ordered visitation if they can prove the child's parents are unfit, or that denying visitation would harm the child's well-being. Since Matt is the biological father with no history of abuse or neglect, and since the baby is only a few weeks old, I have a serious uphill battle. The standard is high because courts generally let parents decide who can see their children. But Liliana says we can still file a petition and see if Matt is willing to talk about a visitation schedule, rather than fight it in court. I decide to try one more time to reach out to Matt peacefully before we go the legal route. I go online and order groceries to be delivered to his apartment, things like diapers and formula and easy meals. I include a note that says I just want to help, and I'm offering to come over at night to hold the baby so he can sleep. I keep the tone neutral and non-threatening, hoping that being tired from single parenting might make him more open to accepting help. The groceries get delivered on a Wednesday afternoon according to the tracking information. I wait 2 days for any response, checking my phone constantly even though I know he blocked my number. Then on Friday night, I check his Instagram and see a new post about setting boundaries with toxic people who don't respect his healing process. The post has a picture of him holding the baby with a serious expression, and it already has 200 likes. I know my peace offering failed completely. 23 days after I filed my public records request, a large envelope arrives in my mailbox with an official government seal. I take it inside and open my laptop, my hands shaking as I download the audio file they included on a thumb drive. I press play, and my own voice comes through the speakers, frantic and raw, screaming those words about my daughter dying. The dispatch operator tries to calm me down with that practiced voice they use, explaining they can't intervene in the hospital medical decisions. The recording confirms every detail of the timeline I documented. In the background, I can hear Matt hyperventilating and making those gasping sounds, and I can hear other voices and commotion from the hospital. I listen to the whole thing twice with my hands clenched into fists on the desk, and then I immediately forward a copy to Liliana's email address and save multiple backups in different locations on my computer and on 2 separate thumb drives that I put in different places in my house. I open a new browser window and type in search terms about emergency consent laws in obstetrics. The first few results are medical journals with complicated language, but I keep clicking until I find actual court cases with real outcomes. I print everything, watching page after page stack up in my printer tray. One case from Ohio talks about a woman who died because doctors waited 12 minutes for the husband to decide, and the hospital settled for $3 million. Another case from Texas describes a 5-minute delay that cost both mother and baby, and that hospital paid out $8 million. I highlight the key sentences with a yellow marker, the parts that say hospitals can proceed under emergency protocols when delay means death. By the time I finish, it's after midnight, and I have 73 pages spread across my kitchen table. I buy a thick binder from the office supply store the next morning and spend 3 hours organizing everything with labeled tabs, 1 section for each case, with my own timeline attached at the front showing Julia's 5-minute delay. The binder looks professional and serious, like something a lawyer would carry, and I feel like I'm finally building a real argument instead of just screaming into the void. My phone rings 2 days later with the hospital's main number showing on the screen. Sienna Henderson's voice comes through smooth and practiced, telling me the internal review is ongoing, and they want to be responsive to my concerns. She says the word complexities 3 times in the first minute, then switches to unusual circumstances twice, and I can hear her building up to telling me they found nothing wrong. I interrupt her mid-sentence and ask directly why they gave Matt drugs for his panic attack, while Julia bled to death on the table 3 feet away from him. The silence on the other end lasts maybe 5 seconds, but it feels longer, and when she speaks again, her voice has changed. Less smooth, more careful. She says she can't discuss specific medical decisions during an ongoing review, but she appreciates my patience while they gather all relevant information. I thank her politely, even though I want to scream, and after we hang up, I write down the exact time and date of the call in my notebook, along with every evasive phrase she used and that telling silence when I mentioned the medication. The Facebook message appears 3 days later from an account with a gray silhouette instead of a profile picture. I almost delete it thinking it's spam, but something makes me open it. The message says the sender was one of the nurses in Julia's room and she's so sorry for what happened, but she can't talk officially because she'll lose her job. There's a phone number at the bottom and instructions to call from a number that's not saved in my contacts, and to meet somewhere outside the hospital. My hands start shaking as I read it twice, then 3 times, because this could be the break I've been waiting for, or it could be the hospital trying to trap me somehow. I spend an hour pacing around my kitchen trying to decide if it's worth the risk. Finally, I grab my keys and drive to a gas station 2 miles away, use the payphone there with quarters from my car's cup holder and dial the number. A young woman's voice answers on the second ring, and we arrange to meet at a coffee shop 30 minutes from the hospital on her next day off, which is Thursday afternoon at 2. Thursday takes forever to arrive, but finally I'm walking into the coffee shop at 1:55, scanning the tables for anyone who looks like a nurse. A woman in her late 20s with dark hair and a ponytail waves at me from a corner booth, and I slide in across from her. She introduces herself as Brooke Henderson, and her hands are wrapped tight around a coffee cup like she needs something to hold on to. She starts talking before I can even order anything, telling me she's been thinking about Julia every single day since it happened, and she can't sleep because she keeps seeing those 5 minutes play out in her head. Brooke confirms that Matt was given Xanax within 3 minutes of his panic attack starting, that the attending physician waited a full 5 minutes for him to make a decision, and that during those 5 minutes, Julia's vital signs were crashing while the medical team just stood there waiting for permission to act. She says she's been a labor and delivery nurse for 6 years and she's never seen anything like it, never seen a team wait that long when someone was actively dying. Her voice cracks when she tells me that if they'd acted at the 2-minute mark, they probably could have saved both Julia and the baby, but by minute 5 it was too late. I ask if she'll make an official statement and she shakes her head hard, saying she can't risk her nursing license and she has student loans and rent to pay. We sit there for another 20 minutes while she tells me every detail she remembers, and I commit it all to memory because I can't write anything down in front of her without making her more nervous. I call Liliana from my car in the coffee shop parking lot before I even start the engine. She answers on the first ring and I tell her everything Brooke said, speaking fast because I don't want to forget any details. Liliana listens without interrupting, and when I finish, she says this information is crucial, but we need to be careful about how we use it since Brooke won't go on record. She says she'll draft another preservation notice, this time specifically requesting all medication administration logs that would show what was given to Matt and when, plus the detailed timeline of all interventions attempted for Julia. The letter won't mention Brooke by name, but it will make clear we know about the Xanax and the delay, which should make the hospital nervous about what else we might know. I can hear her typing while we talk, the keyboard clicking in the background, and she says she'll have the letter ready to send by tomorrow morning. We hang up and I sit in my car for 10 minutes just breathing, feeling like for the first time since Julia died, I have actual proof of what happened instead of just my own memories. The state medical board complaint form arrives in my email 2 days later after I submit the online request. I print it out and spend an entire afternoon filling it in with careful block letters, naming the attending physician and detailing the exact timeline of events. The form has a section asking what outcome I'm seeking, and I write that I want an investigation into whether the physician's actions met the standard of care and whether hospital policies prioritize liability protection over patient lives. I attach copies of my timeline, the 911 recording transcript, and a summary of the case law I researched, showing that emergency protocols should have been used. The whole packet is 15 pages long by the time I'm done, and I mail it certified with return receipt requested, so I'll have proof they received it. Liliana warned me that medical board investigations can take months and often result in private reprimands that never become public. But filing this complaint feels like I'm finally making the hospital and doctor answer for what happened, even if it's just to an investigator behind closed doors. Matt posts on Instagram 3 days later, and I only know because my cousin sends me a screenshot. The post shows him holding the baby with a serious expression, and the caption talks about being harassed by people who don't understand trauma. He shares a carefully edited version of the timeline that makes it sound like he made an immediate decision, and the doctors just couldn't save Julia, despite everyone's best efforts. The comments fill up within an hour, hundreds of people telling him how strong he is, and how sorry they are for his loss. Several comments specifically mention crazy mothers-in-law who make everything worse, and I have to close the screenshot before I throw my phone across the room. Liliana warned me that engaging on social media will only hurt my case, so instead I screenshot everything from my documentation folder and force myself to close the app without responding. I spend the rest of the night doing dishes and laundry, anything to keep my hands busy so I don't grab my phone and tell all his followers the truth about what really happened. Liliana calls the next morning and says she found a therapist who specializes in grief and trauma, someone named Quentin Blake who has experience with cases involving medical loss. She explains that having a mental health professional's support will help if we end up in court, and Matt tries to paint me as unstable. I make an appointment for the following Tuesday at 10 in the morning. Quentin's office is in a converted house with comfortable chairs and soft lighting that's probably supposed to be calming, but just makes me more aware that I'm here because my daughter is dead. The first session is hard because Quentin asks me to talk about Julia as a person, not just about her death, and I break down remembering her as a little girl who used to make up songs while she colored. But Quentin doesn't judge my rage when it comes pouring out, doesn't tell me I need to forgive or let go or any of that garbage. He says anger is a normal response to injustice and preventable loss. We just need to channel it into actions that won't backfire and cost me access to my granddaughter. At the end of the session, Quentin gives me homework to write 2 documents. One is a letter to Julia saying everything I wish I could tell her, and the other is a separate document listing everything I know about Matt and what I think should happen to him. He explains the letter to Julia is for processing grief, and the Matt document is for getting the revenge fantasies out of my head so they don't consume me. I spend the entire weekend on both documents. The letter to Julia making me cry for hours as I write about how proud I am of her and how sorry I am that I couldn't save her. The Matt document comes out cold and detailed, listing every failure and every lie, and by the time I finish it, I can see the difference between what I want to happen and what I can realistically make happen. The letter to Julia goes in a folder I keep in my nightstand. The Matt document I read once more and then delete because Quentin said the point was just to get it out, not to keep it. Sienna Henderson calls again the following Wednesday, and her tone is different this time, more formal. She proposes a mediated meeting where I can share my concerns directly with hospital leadership, and they can explain their review process and findings. She emphasizes multiple times that this would not be an admission of liability, and nothing said in the meeting could be used in future litigation, but it would be an opportunity for mutual understanding and healing. I'm immediately suspicious of the whole setup because it sounds like they want to manage me rather than actually address what happened, but I tell her I need to talk to my attorney first. I call Liliana right after we hang up and she says it's worth attending just to hear what they're willing to say. So I call Sienna back and agree to a meeting in 2 weeks with the clear understanding that I'm bringing my attorney with me. I spend the next week working with Liliana on the visitation petition, sitting at her office conference table with stacks of documents spread out between us. She asks me questions about every interaction I had with Julia during her pregnancy, every conversation about the baby, every time Matt and I discussed grandparent involvement, and I answer while she types notes into her laptop. The petition ends up being 12 pages long with attached exhibits including photos of Julia and me together, text messages where Julia talked about wanting me involved in the baby's life, and a timeline of my attempts to contact Matt after Julia died. Liliana reads the final draft out loud to me, and it sounds measured and reasonable, focusing on the baby's need for family connections rather than attacking Matt, but I know he'll see it as a declaration of war. We file it electronically on a Thursday afternoon, and the system generates a case number immediately, making it feel suddenly real and official. Liliana warns me that Matt will be served within a few days, and his response will probably be angry and defensive, and she's already preparing for him to file counter motions about my behavior at the hospital. I leave her office with a copy of the petition in my bag, feeling like I've taken another concrete step forward, even though I know the court process will take months. 3 days after we file, my phone rings with a number I don't recognize, and when I answer, it's Sienna Henderson from the hospital. But her voice sounds different this time, stressed and less polished than usual. She asks if I've been in contact with any hospital staff members, and I tell her truthfully that I haven't reached out to anyone who works there. She pauses for a long moment and then says they've received an anonymous complaint filed with the state health department that includes very specific details about medication administration and decision-making delays during Julia's delivery. I can hear papers rustling in the background, and she's talking faster than normal, asking if I know anything about who might have filed this complaint. I tell her I have no idea who would have done that, which is technically true since I don't know for certain it was Brooke. And Sienna's voice gets sharper as she warns me that interfering with hospital personnel or encouraging staff to make complaints could be considered witness tampering. The fact that she's this worried tells me the complaint must include details that make the hospital nervous about what their own employees might say. And after we hang up, I add notes about this conversation to my documentation file with the exact time and date. 2 days later, I get a call from a man who introduces himself as Kenneth Bailey, a caseworker with Child Protective Services. My stomach drops because I didn't call CPS myself after Liliana warned me it could backfire badly. But Kenneth explains they received multiple calls expressing concern about Matt's ability to care for a newborn while dealing with trauma and grief. He's careful not to tell me who made the reports, but he says state law requires them to do a wellness check whenever they receive concerns about an infant's safety. Kenneth asks me a series of questions about my observations of Matt's mental state, whether I have concerns about the baby's care, what kind of support system Matt has, and whether I've witnessed any concerning behavior. I answer honestly, telling him about Matt's panic attack during the delivery, his focus on social media instead of grieving, his refusal to let me see the baby. But I'm also careful to say I haven't actually seen how he's caring for her day to day. Kenneth takes detailed notes and says he'll be visiting Matt's apartment within the next 48 hours to assess the situation, and he thanks me for my cooperation. After we hang up, I feel relieved that someone official is checking on the baby's safety, but also anxious about how this might affect my visitation petition if Matt finds out I talked to CPS. Kenneth calls me back 3 days later to report on his visit to Matt's apartment. He says Matt was defensive at first and accused me of calling CPS to harass him, but he eventually cooperated with the home visit and answered all of Kenneth's questions. The apartment was clean and well organized. The baby appeared healthy and appropriately cared for with regular weight gain and no signs of neglect or abuse, and Matt has been taking her to all scheduled pediatric appointments and keeping detailed records. Kenneth notes in his report that Matt is clearly stressed and struggling with the demands of single parenthood, which is normal for someone in his 30s situation, and Kenneth offered him information about parenting classes and in-home support services through the county. He says there's no basis for any protective intervention because the baby's basic needs are being met, and there are no immediate safety concerns. I thank Kenneth for being thorough, and tell him I'm relieved to know the baby is safe, even though I'm frustrated that this doesn't give me any leverage for getting visitation. Kenneth says he'll be closing the case, but the file will remain on record, and if any future concerns arise, they'll have this baseline assessment to compare against. My next therapy session with Quentin happens on a Tuesday morning, and he asks me to explore what I really want Julia's death to mean in the long term. I sit in the comfortable chair in his office and admit that part of me wants Matt to suffer the way I'm suffering every single day, wants him publicly shamed so everyone knows he let Julia die, wants him legally punished and financially destroyed. But I also know that destroying Matt won't bring Julia back and won't change what happened in that delivery room, and the baby needs her father even though I hate him for what he did. Quentin asks me what kind of legacy would honor Julia better, and I realize that pushing for real hospital accountability and policy changes that could save other mothers might mean more than just punishing one person. He helps me see that my rage is valid and I don't have to let it go, but I can channel it into actions that create something positive instead of just tearing Matt down. We talk about the difference between justice and revenge, and how justice focuses on preventing future harm, while revenge just focuses on making someone pay. I leave the session feeling like I have permission to want both things, to hate Matt, and also work toward changes that go beyond him. The following week, I'm checking the hospital's physician directory online, and I notice that the attending doctor who was in Julia's delivery room isn't listed on the schedule anymore. I call Sienna Henderson directly and ask her about it, trying to keep my voice neutral and professional. She pauses before answering and then says she can't comment on specific personnel matters, but she confirms that the physician is not currently seeing patients pending the completion of their internal review process. This is the first concrete sign that the hospital is actually taking my complaints seriously, instead of just managing me. And while it's not the public accountability I want, it feels like a small victory that someone is facing real consequences. I ask Sienna when the internal review will be complete, and she says these processes take time because they need to be thorough, and she'll keep me updated as appropriate. After we hang up, I update my timeline document with this new information, noting the date the physician was removed from the schedule, and Sienna's careful non-denial about the connection to Julia's case. A week later, I get another message from Brooke through the anonymous Facebook account, and when I open it, my hands start shaking. She says she kept a personal journal entry the night Julia died because the whole situation bothered her so much, and she wrote down everything she remembered while it was still fresh in her mind. The entry describes the 60 seconds ultimatum the doctor gave Matt, the chaos that followed when he couldn't respond, the decision to give him Xanax, and the exact timeline of Julia's declining vital signs while everyone waited. Brooke still isn't willing to make an official statement because she's terrified of losing her nursing license, but she took photos of the journal pages and sends them to me through encrypted messaging. I download the photos immediately and forward them to Liliana with a note explaining the source, and Liliana responds within an hour saying, "This is powerful evidence because it's contemporaneous documentation that can't be explained away as reconstructed memory." She warns me that getting Brooke to testify in court would still be extremely difficult, but having this journal entry gives us leverage and credibility that we didn't have before. Liliana files a motion in probate court the next week on behalf of Julia's estate, requesting limited disclosure of medical records related to her death, so the estate can evaluate potential legal claims. I'm listed as the estate representative since Julia died without a will, and I'm her closest blood relative, which gives me standing to request information even though Matt controls everything else as surviving spouse. Matt's attorney files an objection 3 days later, arguing that Matt has full authority over Julia's medical information as her husband, and he doesn't consent to releasing anything to me. The objection uses words like privacy and confidentiality, and claims I'm on a fishing expedition to harass Matt and the hospital. The judge schedules a hearing for 3 weeks out to hear arguments from both sides, and Liliana explains this is going to be a real fight, but we have good legal arguments about the estate's independent interest in understanding what happened. She says probate courts generally recognize that estates need information to evaluate potential claims, and the fact that Matt is blocking access actually strengthens our argument that there's something worth hiding. 2 days after the probate motion is filed, I receive a formal letter from the hospital on their official letterhead with Sienna Henderson's signature at the bottom. The letter opens with condolences for my loss and states that the hospital has completed an internal review of the events surrounding Julia's delivery and death. They've identified opportunities for improvement in their policies and procedures, and they're committed to ensuring the highest quality of care for all patients going forward. The language is carefully crafted to avoid any admission of wrongdoing or liability, using phrases like lessons learned and quality enhancement rather than mistakes or failures. But the mention of policy review and procedural changes tells me they know something went wrong, and they're trying to fix it without actually saying they did anything wrong the first time. I read the letter 3 times looking for any hint of real accountability, but it's all corporate speak and legal protection. I file it with all my other documentation anyway, because even this vague acknowledgement might be useful later, and I send a copy to Liliana with a note asking her to analyze the exact wording. Kenneth from CPS calls me the following Monday to say they're officially closing the case because Matt has been fully compliant with all their recommendations. He enrolled in a parenting support program through the county and has been attending weekly sessions, and he's accepted in home visits from a family services worker who comes twice a week to provide guidance and support. Kenneth says Matt is clearly overwhelmed by single parenthood and still processing his grief, which is completely normal given the circumstances, but he's managing adequately, and there are no safety concerns for the baby. I thank Kenneth for his thoroughness and ask if he can note in the official file that I'm available as a support resource if Matt ever needs help, hoping this makes me look reasonable and cooperative if we end up fighting about visitation in family court. Kenneth agrees to add that note and says the case file will be sealed, but could be reopened if new concerns arise in the future, and he wishes me well with the family court proceedings, since he's seen my visitation petition in the system. After we hang up, I feel a mix of relief that the baby is truly safe, and frustration that every official review keeps finding Matt adequate when I know he let Julia die. Quentin schedules 3 sessions specifically focused on preparing me for possible court testimony about my fitness to see the baby. I sit in his office with a notebook while he asks me the kinds of questions Matt's attorney might ask, and my hands shake so hard I can barely write. He asks about my behavior at the hospital, and I immediately start defending myself, explaining how Matt was on the floor and Julia was dying and nobody would listen. Quentin stops me and says that's exactly what I can't do in court. He makes me practice answering the same question 5 different ways until I can say I reacted inappropriately to extreme circumstances without getting angry or making excuses. The sessions are brutal because staying calm while talking about that day feels like betraying Julia. But Quentin keeps reminding me that emotional control is what will get me access to my granddaughter. He coaches me to talk about my love for the baby and wanting to honor Julia's memory by being present in her life, not about my feelings toward Matt. By the 3rd session, I can get through a full practice testimony without crying or raising my voice, and Quentin says that's the version of me the judge needs to see. The envelope from the records department arrives on a Tuesday morning with official stamps and seals all over it. I open it at my kitchen table and find the 911 audio file on a CD with a certification letter stating it's an authentic copy of my call from the hospital hallway. I have to borrow my neighbor's old computer because mine doesn't have a CD drive anymore, and when I finally get the file to play, my own voice comes through the speakers. I sound completely different from how I remember, more desperate and less coherent, screaming about my daughter dying while the dispatcher tries to calm me down. In the background, I can hear Matt's hyperventilating and someone saying something about a paper bag, and the timestamp shows I made this call at 2:51 p.m., right in the middle of those crucial minutes when Julia was bleeding out. I listen to it 3 times even though it makes me feel sick, and then I call Liliana and tell her I have the authenticated recording. She comes to my house that same afternoon to make copies and says this is exactly what we need for the court filings. The recording proves I was trying to get help for Julia, while Matt was unable to function, and it contradicts his social media version where he claims he made immediate decisions and did everything possible. Liliana explains that this kind of evidence from the actual moment is powerful, because Matt can't rewrite what happened or claim I'm misremembering. She integrates the audio file and certification into our visitation petition as proof of the timeline and my state of mind, and she says if Matt's attorney tries to paint me as unstable, this recording shows I was advocating for my daughter's life. The court filing goes in that Friday, and I keep 1 copy of the CD in my safe deposit box, and another in my filing cabinet at home. 3 days later, a process server shows up at my door with papers for a restraining order petition filed by Matt. My hands go numb as I read through the document, which describes me as unstable and threatening based on my violent outburst at the hospital. The petition includes screenshots of the police citation from that day, and claims Matt fears for his safety and the baby's safety if I have any unsupervised access. There's a whole section about how my behavior caused his panic attack to worsen and put both him and the baby at risk, and he's asking the court to prohibit me from coming within 500 feet of him or the baby until a full hearing can determine if I'm dangerous. A temporary hearing is scheduled for exactly 1 week from today, and the temporary order is already in effect, which means I can't go near Matt or try to contact him at all. I call Liliana immediately, and she says we need to take this very seriously, because if he gets a permanent restraining order, it will completely kill our visitation petition. No judge will grant grandparent visits to someone who has a restraining order against them, and Matt's attorney knows this. This is his strategy to cut me off from the baby permanently, by using my worst moment against me. I spend the rest of that day reading and rereading the petition, getting more scared each time I see phrases like violent tendencies and poses a danger. That night, I get a message through Facebook from Brooke saying she needs to tell me something but can't talk on the phone. She says a state health department investigator contacted her about the events in Julia's delivery room, and she's agreed to speak with them through her attorney. She can't give me details about what she'll say because her lawyer told her not to discuss it, but she wanted me to know she's willing to talk to investigators. The fact that she's taking this step at all feels huge because I know she's putting her nursing license at risk. I message her back thanking her for her courage and telling her I understand she's taking a big chance, and I hope her testimony leads to changes that prevent other families from going through this. She doesn't respond, but I see she read the message and I save screenshots of the whole conversation in case it matters later. Following Quentin's coaching, I spend 2 full days drafting a statement for the restraining order hearing that acknowledges my behavior at the hospital was wrong, but explains the circumstances. I write and rewrite the same paragraphs over and over, trying to find the balance between taking responsibility and making the judge understand why I acted that way. The statement talks about watching my daughter die while her husband was unable to make decisions, and how my reaction came from extreme grief and desperation, not from any actual threat to Matt or the baby. I focus the second half on my commitment to my granddaughter's well-being and my willingness to follow whatever conditions the court sets, including supervised visits or parenting classes or continued therapy. I email the draft to Liliana, and she calls me that same evening to say it strikes the right tone of accountability without being too apologetic or defensive. We spend the next 3 days practicing my delivery over video calls, going through the statement until I can read it out loud without crying or getting angry. Quentin sits in on one practice session and suggests I look directly at the judge when I talk about wanting to honor Julia's memory, and he reminds me that showing emotional control during this hearing is critical. By the morning of the hearing, I've practiced so many times I almost have it memorized, but I still bring printed copies in case my hands shake too much to read from my phone. The restraining order hearing happens in a small courtroom with Judge Jacqueline Hale presiding. Matt sits on the opposite side with his attorney, and he won't look at me even once during the whole proceeding. His attorney goes first and presents the police report from the hospital, along with statements from security officers who removed me from the delivery room. They play up my behavior as violent and uncontrolled, using words like attacked and physical force, and they argue that someone with such poor emotional regulation shouldn't have unsupervised access to an infant. When it's my turn, Liliana presents my statement and I read it exactly how we practiced, keeping my voice steady and looking at Judge Hale when I talk about Julia. The judge listens without interrupting and reviews all the evidence, including the police report and my statement. She asks me directly if I've made any threats or attempts to contact Matt since being blocked, and I can honestly say no, because I've followed Liliana's advice to only communicate through attorneys. Judge Hale takes about 10 minutes to review everything, and then she delivers her decision. She says my behavior at the hospital was concerning and inappropriate, but she finds it was an isolated incident in response to extreme trauma. She notes that I haven't made any threats since that day, and that I'm engaged in therapy and following legal procedures. She denies the permanent restraining order but sets clear boundaries in a temporary order that I can't go to Matt's home without permission, can't contact him except through attorneys, and can't post about him on social media. I'm so relieved I almost start crying right there in the courtroom, and Liliana squeezes my arm as we stand to leave. Matt's attorney looks annoyed but doesn't argue with the decision, and Matt finally glances at me with an expression I can't read before walking out. 2 weeks later, we're back in front of Judge Hale for the grandparents' visitation hearing, and this time Matt's attorney argues I'm a threat to the baby's stability. He presents Matt's version where he needs time to bond with his daughter without interference from someone who attacked him during the most traumatic moment of his life. Liliana counters with evidence of my stable home, my clean record except for that one hospital incident, my close relationship with Julia, and research about the importance of grandparent connections for children who've lost a parent. She presents letters from my therapist and from Quentin about my progress in managing grief constructively, and she emphasizes that I'm willing to accept any conditions the court sets. Judge Hale asks several questions about my current mental state and my plans for visits, and I answer each one calmly using the techniques Quentin taught me. After reviewing everything, Judge Hale orders a gradual supervised visitation schedule starting with 2-hour visits twice a week at a neutral location with a court-appointed supervisor. She says she'll review the arrangement in 3 months to consider expanding it if things go well. It's not everything I wanted, but it's so much more than I dared hope for, and I have to cover my mouth to keep from making noise in the courtroom. Liliana is smiling as we leave, and she says this is a solid foundation we can build on. My first supervised visit happens at a family services center 3 days later. Kira Newman introduces herself as the court-appointed supervisor and explains she'll be taking notes during the visit, but mostly staying in the background. Matt arrives with the baby in a carrier, and he sets it down without saying anything to me, then leaves immediately without making eye contact. Kira helps me get the baby out of the carrier, and then I'm holding my granddaughter for the first time. She's 6 weeks old now, and she has Julia's exact nose and the same shape eyes, and I can barely breathe looking at her. I spend the whole 2 hours just holding her and talking to her quietly, while Kira sits in the corner writing things down. The baby falls asleep against my chest, and I cry silently, careful not to wake her, thinking about how Julia should be here doing this. When Matt comes back to pick her up, I thank him for bringing her even though he doesn't respond or look at me. I hand the baby back to Kira, who puts her in the carrier, and then they're gone. And I'm standing alone in the family services center, feeling like something broken inside me has started to heal just a tiny bit. The mediation meeting with the hospital happens the following week at their administrative offices. I go with Liliana while Sienna Henderson brings the chief medical officer and the hospital's attorney. They present their internal review findings using a PowerPoint presentation with graphs and flowcharts, and they acknowledge that communication could have been better during Julia's emergency. Their protocols for obstetric emergencies have been updated to provide clearer guidance about when physicians can proceed without explicit consent, and they outline specific policy changes including mandatory training on emergency consent rules and a new rapid response protocol for mother and baby crises. Everything is carefully worded to avoid admitting fault or apologizing directly, but the fact that they changed their policies tells me they know something went wrong. They don't say Julia's death was preventable, and they don't admit the Xanax decision was wrong, but they talk about lessons learned and quality improvement. It's not the accountability I wanted, but it's something concrete, and I accept their explanation while Liliana makes it clear we're not waiving any legal rights by attending this meeting. The hospital attorney seems relieved when we don't push for more, and Sienna walks us out afterward without saying much. The state medical board letter arrives 2 weeks later in an official envelope with their seal. The letter informs me they've opened a formal investigation into my complaint against the attending physician, and they'll notify me of the outcome once it's complete. They warn this could take several months or longer because they need to review records and interview witnesses and follow their procedures. The letter explains they can't share details about the investigation process, or tell me who they're talking to, but they take all complaints seriously, and will review the case thoroughly. I file the letter with everything else in my documentation binder, adding it to the timeline I've been keeping since the day Julia died. I try to be patient knowing that these processes move slowly, but at least the complaint is being taken seriously, and someone official is looking at what happened in that delivery room. My next therapy session with Quentin happens 3 days later in his office that smells like coffee, and has those soft chairs that are supposed to make you feel calm. He pulls out a worksheet with different scenarios written on it, and we start practicing what I'll say when I see Matt at drop-offs and pickups. Quentin makes me repeat the same boring phrases over and over until they feel automatic in my mouth. Thank you for bringing her. I'll have her ready at 5. See you next week. The words feel empty and wrong when what I really want to say is that he killed my daughter, but Quentin explains that staying neutral and calm is the only way the judge will let me keep seeing the baby. He teaches me this breathing thing where I count to 4 while breathing in and count to 4 while breathing out, and we practice it until I can do it without thinking. Then he has me imagine Matt's face and practice the breathing while looking at a photo of him on my phone, and my hands shake so bad I almost drop the phone, but I keep breathing and counting. Quentin says the rage will always be there, but I can learn to control it long enough to get through a 2-minute interaction, and that's all I need to protect my time with my granddaughter. We spend the whole hour on this one skill, and by the end I'm exhausted, but I can say the neutral phrases without my voice shaking too much. Liliana calls me that same afternoon with news about the probate hearing. The judge ordered the hospital to turn over Julia's medical records to the estate attorney, including all the medication logs and the detailed timeline of what happened in that delivery room. She says it took 2 weeks for the records to actually arrive because the hospital kept asking for extensions, but now she has them spread out on her desk and she needs me to come look at them. I drive to her office the next morning and she's got everything organized in clear plastic folders with colored tabs marking different sections. The first thing she shows me is the medication administration record, and there it is in black and white. Xanax 0. 5 milligrams administered to patient's husband at 2:47 p.m. The physician's note right below it says, decision-making capacity impaired from 2:45 to 2:52 p.m. Julia's vital signs chart shows her blood pressure dropping at 2:49 p.m. and her heart rate going crazy at 2:50 p.m. The time of death is listed as 2:58 p.m. 11 minutes. That's how long it took from when they gave Matt the Xanax until my daughter died. I have to run to Liliana's bathroom and throw up because seeing it all written down in official hospital records makes it real in a way it wasn't before. When I come back, Liliana has a box of tissues ready, and she lets me cry for a few minutes before we keep going through the documents. Every single thing Brooke told me is confirmed in these records. The doctor gave Matt the ultimatum at 2:44 p.m. He started having his panic attack immediately. Instead of proceeding with emergency treatment for Julia, they medicated him and waited for him to calm down enough to make a decision. The nursing notes described Julia's condition getting worse minute by minute while they stood there waiting. One nurse wrote that she questioned the attending physician about proceeding under implied consent, but was told to wait for spousal authorization. Reading that makes me want to scream because it means someone in that room knew they should save Julia, but the doctor chose to follow protocol instead. Liliana explains that this documentation proves medical negligence, but since only Matt can file a wrongful death lawsuit and he's never going to do that, these records mainly help the medical board investigation. She makes copies of everything for me, and I take them home and read through them 3 more times that night, highlighting every timestamp and every note about Julia's declining condition. The medication logs are even more detailed than the main chart. They show exactly what Brooke described with timestamps down to the minute. Matt received Xanax at 2:47 p.m. A second nurse's note at 2:48 p.m. says husband appears calmer, but still unable to respond to questions. At 2:49 p.m., there's a note that the attending physician attempted to get verbal consent from husband, but he was non-responsive. At 2:50 p.m., they finally started emergency interventions for Julia, but by then it was too late. The log shows they tried CPR and multiple medications, but her heart had already stopped. I sit at my kitchen table reading these pages over and over, seeing in official hospital documentation that they chose to treat Matt's panic attack instead of saving my daughter's life. Liliana had explained on the phone that this creates a strong case for medical negligence, that any reasonable physician should have proceeded with emergency treatment instead of waiting. But since Matt is the only one who can sue the hospital and he's never going to hold anyone accountable, these records just serve as proof for the medical board. I make 3 copies of everything and file them in different locations, because this evidence is the closest thing I'll ever have to proof that the hospital chose wrong. Kenneth from CPS sends me a letter 2 weeks later in an official envelope with the state seal. The letter says they're formally closing the case because Matt has successfully completed the parenting support program and has demonstrated appropriate care for the infant. Kenneth noted in the letter that Matt attends all pediatric appointments on time, keeps the apartment clean, and has accepted help from family services. There's a paragraph at the end that says I've been cooperative throughout the process and have expressed willingness to provide support if needed, which Kenneth told me on the phone might help if custody arrangements ever get revisited in the future. I read the letter 3 times trying to feel glad that the baby is safe and Matt is getting the help he needs, but all I can think about is that he's being praised and supported for doing basic parent stuff while Julia is dead. The state spent all this time and money making sure he knows how to change diapers and feed a baby on schedule, but nobody is holding him accountable for the panic attack that killed my daughter. I file the letter with everything else and try to focus on the part about me being cooperative because that might matter later. Matt keeps following the court-ordered visitation schedule exactly like Judge Hale required. He drops the baby off at the Family Services Center at exactly the time we agreed on and picks her up exactly 2 hours later. He never looks at me or says anything beyond the absolute minimum like here or bye. There's no chance we're ever going to have any kind of normal relationship or be able to raise this baby together the way I imagined when Julia was pregnant. I've had to accept that the best I can hope for is this cold but functional arrangement where we both follow the court order and communicate only about logistics. In therapy, Quentin helps me grieve the loss of the family dynamic I wanted, where where Matt and I would support each other and share memories of Julia and raise her daughter together. He makes me say out loud that this fantasy is dead, and I need to accept the reality of what we actually have, which is two people who can barely stand to be in the same room, but who both love the baby enough to make it work. It hurts to let go of that imagined future, but Quentin says accepting reality is the only way I can move forward. I decide to use some of Julia's life insurance money to create something positive instead of spending all my energy fighting. The life insurance company sent me a check for $50,000 because I was listed as a beneficiary on Julia's old policy from before she got married. I take $5,000 of it and set up a memorial fund through the community foundation with Julia's full name on it. The fund is designated specifically for training grants to emergency obstetric providers on decision-making in maternal-fetal crises. The foundation director meets with me and explains that $5,000 is enough to fund at least 2 training sessions per year, where doctors and nurses can learn about emergency consent principles and when to act without waiting for family authorization. We work together to develop criteria that honor Julia's memory, and she promises to send me reports about every training session the fund supports. Setting up the fund takes 3 meetings and a lot of paperwork, but it gives me a sense of purpose beyond just being angry at Matt and the hospital. It feels like a way to create something good from this nightmare. Like maybe Julia's death can prevent future tragedies if we can train medical providers to handle these situations better. 5 months after Julia died, Sienna Henderson from the hospital sends me a large envelope with their official letterhead. Inside is a copy of the updated clinical protocols for their obstetric department, along with a cover letter noting that the changes were informed by their review of recent cases, including Julia's. I read through the new protocol 3 times, highlighting the important parts. The document explicitly states that in maternal-fetal crises where delay would likely result in death or serious harm, physicians should proceed with life-saving interventions under emergency consent principles, rather than waiting for family decision-making. It's written in dry medical language full of words like expeditious and contemporaneous documentation, but what it means is that the next mother in Julia's situation might actually be saved because the doctors won't just stand there waiting for permission. The protocol includes specific time limits, saying that if a decision-maker is unavailable or unable to respond within 2 minutes in a life-threatening emergency, the physician must proceed with necessary interventions. 2 minutes. Julia had at least 5 minutes of delay, maybe more. Reading this new protocol makes me cry because it proves the hospital knows they did something wrong, even if they'll never admit it directly or apologize. I make copies and file the protocol carefully in my binder next to all the other documentation. 3 months after the supervised visits started, we're back in Judge Hale's courtroom for the review hearing. Kira submitted her reports showing that all the visits went well, that I was appropriate with the baby, that I followed all the rules. Judge Hale reads through the reports while Matt's attorney sits there looking bored. The judge says that based on Kira's positive reports and my compliance with all court orders, she's expanding my visitation to unsupervised visits of up to 4 hours twice a week. She adds that if things continue going smoothly for another 3 months, we can discuss overnight visits. Matt's attorney doesn't object to any of it, and Matt just sits there staring at his phone. I thank the judge and try not to smile too big because I don't want anyone to think I'm gloating or being inappropriate. Walking out of the courthouse, I let myself feel real hope for the first time since Julia died. I'm going to get to be a real grandmother, not just someone who sees the baby for 2 hours in a supervised room. I'm going to get to take her to my house and feed her and put her down for naps and do all the normal grandmother things I thought I'd lost forever. My first unsupervised visit happens 2 days later. Matt drops the baby off at my apartment and leaves without a word, and then it's just me and my granddaughter for 4 whole hours. I feed her a bottle while sitting on my couch, and I've got my laptop open on the coffee table working on a draft statement for the medical board's final review of my complaint. The contrast hits me hard. I'm doing this completely normal grandmother thing, feeding a baby and watching her fall asleep in my arms, while also typing up documentation about the medical failures that killed her mother. I'm living in 2 different realities at the same time. In one reality, I'm a grandmother who gets to spend time with her granddaughter and read her books and tell her stories about Julia. In the other reality, I'm someone who is still fighting for accountability and justice and trying to make sure the hospital and doctor face consequences. Quentin has helped me understand that I can hold both of these things at the same time, that I can feel grief and joy in the same moment, that moving forward with my life doesn't mean forgetting what happened or forgiving the people who let Julia die. The baby falls asleep against my shoulder and I keep typing with one hand, adding details to my statement about the timeline and the Xanax and the delay. 6 months after Julia died, I've settled into a routine that's nothing like the life I imagined, but is the best version of the life I actually have. I see my granddaughter twice a week for 4-hour visits where we read books, and I tell her stories about her mother, showing her photos and talking about how much Julia loved her, even though they never got to meet. I attend therapy every other week with Quentin to manage my grief and anger, learning techniques to keep functioning when the rage gets overwhelming. I maintain the memorial fund and add to it whenever I can, checking in with the foundation director about upcoming training sessions. I wait for the medical board's final decision, while knowing it might never give me the closure I want, that they might just give the doctor a private warning or require some additional training. Matt and I have reached a cold but functional arrangement where we follow the court order exactly and communicate only about logistics through brief text messages about drop-off times and schedule changes. I'll never forgive him for letting Julia die while he breathed into a paper bag. And I've stopped fantasizing about destroying him because it would only hurt the baby who needs her father, even if he's a coward who couldn't make a decision when it mattered most. The hospital's policy changes are in place, and Brooke's testimony to the investigators is complete, and I've done everything within my power to create accountability and prevent future tragedies. Some days I wake up and the rage is so overwhelming I can barely get out of bed, and I have to use all of Quentin's breathing techniques just to make it through breakfast. Other days I hold my granddaughter and see Julia's eyes looking back at me, and I feel something that's not quite peace but is close enough to keep going. This is the life I have now. This weird mix of incomplete justice and partial victories, and a relationship with my granddaughter that I had to fight for, but finally won. It's not the ending I wanted when I was sitting in that police station in handcuffs thinking about revenge. It's not the justice Julia deserves or the accountability I dreamed about. But it's the ending I've earned through 6 months of strategic patience and documented persistence, through learning to work within systems I hate, and following rules that feel wrong and staying calm when I wanted to scream. I've got my granddaughter and I've got proof that the hospital knows they did wrong. And I've got a memorial fund that might save future mothers, and while that's not enough, while it will never be enough, it's what I managed to build from the worst day of my life. So yeah, that's the whole thing. Nothing crazy, just how it happened. Thanks for hanging out with me for a few minutes, it's always a good time. See you next round if you stop by.